Hello and welcome. In this episode, we're going to be adding reverbs for the first time into our track. Now, the reason we are only now adding the reverbs at this point is because it's going to allow us to focus on the overall tonal balance of the mix. When you add reverbs and delays, they contribute to the overall balance, which I personally think makes things a little more complicated when you're trying to sculpt a good balance. Doing it this way allows us to bring in the reverbs and delays and shape them to the mix balance we have already achieved. Now, there's no right or wrong here, it's just a way of doing things which I found makes me more efficient and allows me to do a much better job sculpting the overall tonal balance of the mix. For me, there was too much bass coming through the reverb, so we're just high passing out that rumble and also using a low shelf to give us a broad tone control over the low end that we have left in. Let's take a listen in context to make sure we haven't overdone it. To judge the reverb level better, I like to move the fader too high and then drop it down slowly until it's sitting at a level which blends into the mix and doesn't draw attention to itself too much. Another point I want to make is that this setup is a little weird. A lot of the instruments in this track are virtual instruments and they come with their own dedicated reverb. So in Cubase, I split the virtual instruments from its reverb, so I had control over it. Unfortunately, this gives us this strange setup where the reverbs are all sat directly next to each other, basically next to the corresponding instrument that it relates to. I'd prefer to do this using reverb sends, but some of the dedicated reverb sounds inside of the virtual instrument do sound really nice, so I didn't really want to pass up on them. Here I'm going to set up our reverb sends for the bongos. We have a verb S and a verb L. These both stand for short and long. Let's set up our verb short. Here in my stem mix view on Cubase, I'm going to pick a reverb, and the reverb I'm going to pick is Verb Suite Classics from Slate Digital. You can use any reverb you like, but for those of you that are using this reverb, a little tip, I personally find the best way of finding what type of reverb you're looking for is not with the presets but with the unit selector located bottom middle. It's going to allow us to click on it, which will expand out the bottom. From here I choose the type of reverb I'm looking for and the preferred length of decay. This method gets me to an appropriate sounding reverb really fast, and then from here you can tweak it if need be. Let's take a listen to the one we have selected. I'm sending a lot of signal to the reverb here, and we're doing this so that we can clearly hear the differences between each reverb as we cycle through. Now that we've done that, let's set up our long reverb. We're choosing 1 to 2 seconds, and the type of reverb that we was going to choose was the hall, but we ended up just sticking with the default plate because it was about the right decay length, and as it turned out it worked quite well after some tweaking. Let's go and set up our sends so that we can hear our reverb choice. We took out some lows using the EQ controls inside of Verb Suite, but I want some extra control, so let's go add an EQ after Verb Suite. We just set up the EQ to give some control over the fidelity of the reverb plates. Let's take a listen and make some tweaks so it blends into our mix balance. I'm fairly happy with how that's sitting. We've just high passed up, so if we use this reverb on anything which has a lot of low end energy, it's not going to muddy up the low end of our mix too much. The low pass is set up to be very gradual, so we get a nice natural fall off at the top end. Between that and the little bit we did with the high shelf, we're just taking away some of those brittle highs you tend to get when you use digital plates. On the bongos, we're going to use the short reverb because it's going to allow us to add a little bit more sustain to each hit. Here, I wanted to place the cymbals further back in the mix, so we're going to use a lot of send to create the impression the cymbals are further back than some of the other instruments. Next, let's add some reverb to our big orchestral impacts. This is one of the virtual instruments which does come with its own reverb, so you can think of the fader directly next to it as a reverb send. Here, I'm muting the dry sound because I want to focus on the tonal balance of just the reverb in the mix. It's just going to make it a little bit easier to EQ because when you're listening, it's not always apparent if you're making decisions based on detail you're hearing in the dry signal or the wet signal. May as well make our jobs easier. Spent a little bit longer on that because it's meant to be an impactful moment in the mix, so I'm trying to get that just right. After taking away some of the lows with the high pass and low shelf, the reverb blends much better with the mix now. Before the EQ, we was getting a lot of boomy washiness being added with each hit, so that's much better now. I just want to add some depth with the piano part, so we're going to send that off to the short reverb. Because we mixed the piano quieter relative to the stringed instruments and the lead instruments, a fair amount of reverb send works quite well here. It just sells the depth of the piano track to the listener. As you can see, I've set up both the short and the long reverb on the acoustic guitar track. I'm just adding them in subtly. I'm trying to treat it in such a way that you may not notice it when it's there, but if I took it away at a random point, you will ask, well, what just happened to the depth of the acoustic guitar track? So it's one of those you'll notice it when it's not there type of scenarios. For the banjo reverb, it's actually a virtual instrument and it does come with its own reverb, so let's bring that in. Now that we've thinned out this reverb, let's take a listen in context and try to bring it into the mix. And now for the mandolin reverb. It's a very bright reverb that comes with the mandolin, especially after high passing up, so let's just soften that up a little so we don't get too much of a brittle sound coming through. I'm happy with that, let's move on to our lead instruments. For the reverb on the pan whistle, again we're just high passing up and utilising a low shelf to keep the lows and mids of the overall mix balance intact. I've also added some treble to give the reverb more presence in the mix. Here, I've went inside of the virtual instrument to edit the reverb a little. I want to add some pre-delay to the reverb, which will allow us to actually mix it in louder without it washing out the dry signal too much. You can use fairly high pre-delays to keep the reverb out of the way of the dry signal. I'm just going to have a little play around here and figure out what works for this track. About 120 milliseconds seems to work quite nicely here, so now let's focus on getting the right blend between the wet and dry signal. We went for a lot of reverb here, with the intro being quite spacey with the synth pad. I think it was probably the right decision placing it in a nice big open space like we have here. This will also contrast quite nicely when the main section comes in and everything comes more to the foreground. So you're going to go from this nice open space in the intro, and then all of a sudden when the main section comes in, everything moves more forward, giving us a nice contrast. And now for the concertina. I'm just continuing on doing the same thing that I've done with all of the other reverbs, essentially adding a broad tone control so that we can balance it with the overall mixed tonality. Here, I don't want too much reverb anyway, it's more of a case of just putting it in so it's not a completely dry signal. With the violin being the main lead instrument in the track, I've given this some extra care, just trying to get the reverb balance just right so that it is apparent in the mix, but out the way enough of the violin that it doesn't become washed out by the reverb. I'm happy with the way everything's sounding here, so let's do an A-B with all of the reverb sends throughout the entire track, and hopefully this will show the fruits of our labour. There you go. As you can hear, the track now has this larger than life feel to it, with all of those reverbs contributing together to give us a nice sense of depth. The other thing that should be noted is, as the reverbs are turned on and off, the tonal balance of the mix actually remains intact. This is thanks to the work we did shaping those reverbs to match the overall tonal balance of the mix. The idea is, you should be able to close your eyes and feel where the instruments are from left to right and also front to back. There's shallow mixes, there's deep mixes, there's wide mixes, and there's narrow mixes. There's no right or wrong, just a question, what is it that you want to do? What best serves your music? And in the end, that's all that matters. Thanks for watching. Next lesson, we'll be setting up the delays. We're getting close to the finishing line here, so hopefully, I'll catch you next time.